Well, hello, everybody. Hello, everyone. If you can take your seats, please. If you can take your seats, please. Great. Thank you. Well, I hope you've all had plenty to eat and drink and a good chance to talk to everyone and catch up with old friends. I hope you've also had a chance to see, as you have been eating and drinking and talking, the faces and names of this year's fellows, and just appreciate for a moment the diverse range of organizations and backgrounds that they come from. That is truly something to be celebrated. If you have not yet eaten enough and drunk enough, the good news is that there will be more food and more drink, courtesy of JP Morgan, in a little while outside in the reception. So thank you, JP Morgan, for... It's always good when people pay for journalists to eat and drink. So thank you, JP Morgan, for giving us all lots of Prosecco and dessert in a little bit. But before we do that, to get the second half of the program rolling, I'd like to invite up to the stage Ed Schuyler, who's Executive Vice President for Global Public Affairs at Citi and one of this year's dinner chairs. As you heard earlier from Raju, Citi have been faithful sponsors of this dinner and the program for many years. And so it's great to have you here, Ed, to introduce the speakers for the next fascinating interview. Thank you.
Thank you, Jillian. And I'm going to take some notes from you because I don't think I've ever seen a room like this get quieted down as quickly. So talk later. We have been a long-time supporter of Knight-Bagehot because while we don't always appreciate being on the receiving end of strong journalism, we do value Knight-Bagehot's role in advancing and supporting that mission, and it is critical. And it's bigger than Knight-Bagehot, and it's bigger than any of the news organizations or the companies we represent. Because like other times in American history, there is a war going on. We've seen wars on poverty, wars on drugs, wars on terrorism. Now, we're seeing wars on institutions. And all these attacks are deeply troubling, whether they are leveled on a law enforcement agency, our intelligence community, but there is something especially corrosive about attacks on journalism. And as we saw this week, they have the potential to be deadly as well. And some days, it does feel like those on the attack are the ones that are winning. But we're fortunate because the institution of journalism is soldiering on, and that is due to many strong people who are protecting the institutions that they represent. We're going to hear from one of those people tonight, A.G Sulzberger, publisher of the New York Times. New York Times has been described as a public trust, and that public trust has had many impressive and visionary stewards over its 150 plus years. A.G. took over the helm of the Times in January in what the paper described as a generational changing of the guard. And he's clearly had his hands full, managing the news, editorial, and business operations of the paper. And while the Times may be thought of a public trust, it is also a public company. And the shift to digital has brought challenges and opportunities to every media organization. And on top of those responsibilities, in a very short time, he has emerged as a leading defender of the role institutions like the Times play in a democracy. He recently said, "We won't be baited into becoming the opposition, and we won't be applauded into becoming the opposition." Because under AG, true to its heritage, the Times isn't on any one side, because facts don't take sides and truth doesn't have allegiance to anybody. So while he may have been talking about the New York Times, he may have easily been talking about the entire profession of journalism. So we were very happy to hear from him this evening. And joining him on stage will be Kara Swisher. Kara is perhaps the country's leading technology reporter, and she became an entrepreneur in her own right when she founded Recode after about 20 years at the Wall Street Journal. And she recently joined the New York Times as a contributing writer in the opinion section. Didn't realize the Times had opinions. It's great to see Kara, yeah, I gotta think about that one. It's great to see Kara in New York. But on behalf of all my banking colleagues, we really think you should stay laser focused on tech. There is simply nothing to see here. So with that, please welcome A.G Sulzberger and Kara Swisher.
Well, we have a lot to talk about, Arthur. AG, what am I supposed to call you?
I think AG is perfect, but
All right.
what does it say about how this is about to go that everyone who stopped me today said, good luck up there?
Good luck. Okay, good. Okay, fantastic.
I heard Kara's.
First of all, Jeff, congratulations for that award. When I saw it, I thought it was the award for drinking more beer than Kavanaugh. But, I mean, come on, stop. And I was worried too. I honestly, and your mother's here. He brought out his mother before to I'm going to be nice because his mother's going to rush the stage. But this picture worried me right here. Here's me, looking like a real gay Johnny Cash. And here's him looking like he tells dad jokes 24/7. So, and he's just a dad. Congratulations.
Everyone needs a straight man.
Yes, it's true.
Yeah.
And you're really straight. So it's true. It's true. You look like 103. So, all right. So, by the way, I have a contract with them. Full disclosure. I don't care.
I tried to go edgy with the charcoal suit.
It's nice. You look good.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. Whatever. So let's start talking about stuff. So you have been in the job how long?
Since January.
January. So what grade would you give yourself? Let's do a Donald Trump question.
Oh, I don't know.
You're supposed to say A. A plus?
Is that how it works?
That's what Donald
I think
did.
journalists are supposed to take their time and make
All right.
sure
So
double check their
how do you
facts.
think you're doing so far?
We actually have 2 times tables right here.
Right.
I'm going to just shout out an answer that's nice but not too nice.
All right. They're going to say A to you. Come on.
Okay.
How do you
All
think you're doing? Tell us about the beginning of doing this.
Well, I think the report is looking great. I think
Okay.
the report is looking as strong as it's ever looked under Dean Baquet and Joe Kahn and this team here. I think that we're, a lot of people want to talk about, just the political climate right now, but at the Times we're determined to cover, the stories of this era, which is climate change, it's technology and how it's disrupting every facet of how life is lived. And it's the rest of the world. And, I'm really proud of the reporting that we're doing, even as we're, publishing a 14,000 word investigation of the president's finances. We're also on the front lines in Yemen, trying to demand that the world, that our readers pay attention to the rest of the world too. So, I mean, if we're just looking from the report standpoint, I'm extremely happy after this year.
Right, but I mean, the fact of the matter is, it's Trump, Trump, and also Trump, right? Correct, and that's been sort of the center of what you've all been covering because you've been set up as the opposite of, and even today's news this week with the pipe bombs and everything being sent in the danger. You all are at the center of something much bigger than just, hey, we're going to do just nice reporting, or do you not see it that way?
Well, I don't think we ever see our job as, hey, we're just going to do nice reporting.
Right. Things have changed. You don't feel like things have changed in the past 12 months?
In the past 12 months specific, look, I think we live in consequential times, and I think it's impossible to miss that. I mean, we've seen the list of, of just what's come up on this stage, trade wars, the rise of populism, not just domestically, but all around the world, seemingly simultaneously. From Poland and Hungary to Brazil, and through our own country, and we're seeing the increasing signs that climate change. We saw the UN report a couple of weeks ago. So I don't think the story is just Trump. In fact, I think in some ways, Trump emerges out of a convergence of other stories around globalization and migration and this global populism and income inequality. And I think our responsibility at the New York Times is to be covering the world broadly, because I think we start to make a mistake as a society when we start to just disentangle these threads and say that these things aren't connected. Now, as far as Trump, we've invested deeply in our Washington bureau. I think you've seen, that we are committed to covering the administration and all the institutions of power in Washington as aggressively as anyone.
But he's also made the New York Times, made CNN, made other publications a character in this insane reality show that's going on. What is that like in terms of pressure on you? And you got sucked into it by speaking to him, apparently. That you went over to this meeting. Explain this meeting. You went
Yeah. So
I wouldn't have gone out without a body cam going there, but go ahead.
I had something better than a body cam. I had James Bennett, our editorial, our opinion editor.
All right.
And former White House correspondent. So the president reached out through the press secretary and asked for a meeting. I didn't know what it was about. I assumed he wanted to grumble. You may have noticed we've been doing some aggressive coverage of the administration, and I believe very strongly that it is the right of anyone who's in the news regularly to raise concerns about that coverage. Dean Baquet, our editor, has an ironclad rule, which I've always appreciated, that he won't meet the president off the record.
Okay.
He feels like presidents of the United States, when they're meeting with the editor. So, but I do believe that you should be able to raise concerns. So I decided to go, studied up on all the various stories and investigative reporting investigative threads we were pursuing that he might grumble about. And then honestly, I think my read of it was, I think he wanted to introduce himself and saw it largely as something of a social visit. Now I don't know if he had some agenda behind that. I'm young, I'm new to the job. Mm-hmm. Maybe he thought he could charm my socks off and I'd call off the hounds. But for me, I felt it was an opportunity to raise my concerns, sitting across the table, looking him in the eye about his rhetoric, which I told him directly and has subsequently been made public.
Go ahead.
Well, it's funny you say that.
Did not. Did you?
I know. No, I know. It's
not yours in particular, but.
Well, so I raised concerns saying that his rhetoric was not just, not just divisive,
right,
which I think people had focused on, but it was getting really dangerous, and not just domestically, which again we too often focus on, but was really making the conditions for reporters abroad, particularly in countries with limited press freedoms, much harder because the world's foremost staunchest defender of the free press and the free speech has always been this country, and people could smell that we were no longer fighting that fight. So I raised those concerns. I was not naive enough to think that he would, look me in the eye and say, "Oh, thanks, I've had my eyes opened by this." But he made a show of listening politely and engaging with the conversation, asking questions, and then the next week proceeded to ratchet up his rhetoric, back to level 15 where it had been, with the enemy of the people. But then did, I think everyone who cares about journalists and journalism a favor by, allowing me to put on the record that he was warned about this. He was warned that these words would, potentially, maybe even perhaps inevitably have consequences. And I think, you can argue about whether or not, it was naive of me to go there, or whether you think that, people in my role should be meeting with the president. We can have that argument. You've heard my view. But I do think it's really important that someone took that opportunity to raise this concern directly, because I don't want him to be able to say.
So where are we now on that? Because the day after, everybody gets a bite bomb. He says something right. He reads it off the prompter, or whatever they handed and made him say, and the next day it was the same thing. Where we are in terms of danger? Because you see what happened in Saudi Arabia. Those signals are everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, Saudi Arabia, what happened to, our colleagues at Reuters and Myanmar, a reporter was raped and murdered in Bulgaria, Annapolis, is, in all of our minds. This is a scary time, and this is before I even talk about, just the amount of hate and vitriol that people experience, and I imagine you've experienced just in the digital space.
So I dish it out, but go ahead. No.
So where is it? This is a really troubling time for all of us who believe in the role of a free press in in supporting a free society.
Are you scared for the New York Times? Are you scared or you just are assuming it's?
Look, we have operated in. Look, my job is to worry on behalf of my colleagues, and I wouldn't be doing my job if I wasn't trying to anticipate, what risks I need to be thinking about. But, the New York Times tries never to operate from a place of fear. We've been operating around the world, on the ground, in dangerous environments, for a long time, including, full-time bureaus in Iraq and Afghanistan since the beginning of the wars there. And we know how to report when government minders are tracking us. We know how to report when our communications are being bugged. We know how to report when we're under threat. And I don't think we're there, but that's why I also don't feel particularly spooked at this point. What I'm more spooked about is the erosion of trust and the polarization of trust in media. I think that is an extremely worrying trend.
That's something you've talked about, not wanting to be the resistance, not wanting to be the opposition.
Yeah.
The Times has gotten more opinionated, not just in opinions, but throughout. You have reporters on Twitter. You've got all kinds of things going on. There's much more, throughout, especially digital media, much more attitude, voice in it. You have talked about that not being the case. And something I worry about is that if you don't have some sort of informed opinion that's from reporting, you end up typing words on a page, or not typing anymore, but you know what I mean? All it is just taking things down and being complicit in things that are something you shouldn't be in.
Yeah. Let me take that in a few different ways. I mean, one, I think, and this is something that you've been a leader on as well. I think the old newspaper conventions don't work anymore. I think the indirection, we did a lot of things as journalists, myself very much included, because I had a very traditional path through Metro dailies. But we did a lot of things that actually disguised why a reader should come to us and believe us. And we thought it was because we're not part of the story. We never want to make the story about us. But indirection, like, that old convention of saying, like, Kara Swisher told a reporter today, right? Didn't tell a reporter, you told me.
Right.
I'm right here.
Right.
And that form is either confusing or feels misleading in the digital environment. And so I do think that we have systematically tried to strip some of those old, that's sort of like the newspaper-ese out of our work, which has allowed more voice to come in, and I think in a really good way. One of my colleagues, Neil Irwin, who's a Knight-Bagehot Fellow, is someone who I really admire how he can write with authority and expertise that bleeds through everything, but doesn't like spin over to opinion.
Spin over to opinion. It's a really interesting, because when I was at the Wall Street Journal, there was when I worked there was three words I hated: to be sure, comma, according to some sources, blank. And I remember writing about Webvan, and they said, Kara, we need you to say, to be sure, some people feel Webvan is going to work. And I said, to be sure, those people are idiots. Because based on my reporting. And so, it was so pleasing to get out of that.
So I totally agree with you there. But I really do agree. Like, I think false equivalency is like the easiest, laziest form of protecting, the appearance of independence.
Right.
When in fact you're actually, that's not what independence looks like. What independence looks like is following the truth wherever it leads, and being comfortable with it leading someplace that you didn't anticipate, and B, you may not even want.
Sure, but coming to a conclusion, do you think that's what's going to happen? Because it happens digitally. On the online publications are much more. I mean, at Recode, we definitely say, guess what? Mark Zuckerberg ruined democracy, and here's why. Let me explain to you. Like, he moved fast, he broke things, and democracy was one of them.
Yeah. Well, so, we do have an opinion section, and thank you for joining it.
That's true. I know you agree with me on that. I'll get to that in a minute. Go ahead.
But look, I also think it's really important the role. So let me just use one example that I think shows both sides of this. we just did a 14,000-word, 18-month investigation, 3 reporters full-time, 2 badass editors, a team project that painted the most comprehensive portrait of President Trump's finances that have been painted to date. And, it wasn't full of, on one hand, on the other hand, we used the word fraud in one of the top couple of graphs there. And, count the number of times a news organization with a good lawyer, and shout out to David McCraw, who's here as well. Oh yeah, David, I forgot you've become a star these days. All right. But point to me the number of news organizations with a good lawyer who's going to let you use the word fraud.
Right.
If law enforcement has not yet already used it. And so I think that's an example of, it is okay to draw a conclusion. But I also think it's really important to remember that, there's a difference. The internet is overflowing with opinionated people, and it's overflowing with opinions, many of them great, many of them terrible, pick your side on which are which. And people have been opinionating that, President Trump's finances, were, there's something shady there for a long time. But what actually caused multiple investigations to be opened? It's digging, it's reporting. And that's the part of the journalistic ecosystem that has been weakened the most over the last couple of decades. And that's what I mean when I say
What about the impact of those stories? Because that was an astonishing display of journalism, astonishing. It was amazing, but whoosh, it went by, right? Like that thing would have gone on for months before. Whoosh, it went by, and something with Stormy Daniels, and then Michael Avenatti was around, and then I don't know what happened to something else. Like, it just goes one after the other.
And it was Kavanaugh as well. Yeah,
forgot about him.
Yeah, we forgot that.
2 weeks ago, right?
Look, I mean, the attention span thing is real, and I don't think we've fully grappled with how to deal with that. If you have suggestions, I'm all ears. I also do think that, that piece was read, one of the longest pieces we ever produced was read by millions of people and caused city, state, and federal officials all to say that they were looking into opening an investigation. So I also don't totally buy that it didn't have an impact.
It's not yet done.
Yeah.
It's not yet done. So let's talk a little bit about where you're going in terms of your business. Let's talk first about social media. I made a reference that Mark Zuckerberg ruined democracy. How do you look at social media now? Because they have sort of hollowed out media. They've hollowed out local media. They've put havoc all over the place. They allow, fake news the real fake news to go around, fake bots, fake opinions, lack of transparency. How are you looking at as a business, as one of the most prominent publishing businesses?
Yeah, I mean, there's 2 sides to this. I mean, one is we have to be clear-eyed that these are the most powerful information monopolies in the history of the world, right? So specifically Facebook and Google, probably in that order. And
Twitter is just bothersome over here. And it's a little cesspool over here.
Well, Twitter's just ruining all our days.
Yes, I noticed he has done 2 tweets.
Oh God, it's so embarrassing. Did you read them?
Yeah, it was 2010.
Yeah, I was ordered to go onto Twitter by the national editor.
The fact that you just said I was ordered to go on Twitter.
Yeah, I know.
It's not the Twitter.
Did I say the Twitter?
Yeah, you did.
I know it's not the Twitter. That was just like a stutter. Yeah.
Right. Okay. On the Twitter, to the Twitters, the tweets from 2010 is pathetic. It's just pressing.
Oh, and they were both.
I tweeted twice from the bathroom. I mean.
I know. Well, they were done on consecutive days at the beginning. They were my first 2 days.
Yes, and they're super dull tweets.
And then I think every media critic in America immediately started following me, and I was like, holy shit, this is a high wire act. I'm gonna get out of here. Which I know is a sign of weakness in your world.
Yeah, you do.
So what were you?
I'm not even going to ask you about Instagram or Tinder. But talk about their impact. But you need to use social media more, just in general. That's my advice to you. But how do you look at them? Because how do you deal with them? Are they as important to your business going forward?
Yeah. No, so these are the 2 most powerful information monopolies in the history of the world, and they are where a huge percentage of the global population go to get their news, and we need to own that. That is, we cannot pretend. If we want to introduce our work to a new generation, we cannot pretend that we can just ignore these spaces. So we know we have to be engaging with, Facebook, with Google, with Twitter, with Snapchat, some of these other places. But we also know, because there's a pretty clear track record right now, that these are not journalistic institutions and they do not share our values. And quite frankly, and I'm sure there's a bunch of people in this room who have sort of bet that like we crack the code. They do not care if you succeed or fail. And they both do not succeed if you care if you succeed or fail affirmatively.
Right.
But also, they're comfortable just accidentally stomping you to death, with an algorithm change. And so I think, getting to that sort of sweet spot of what is clear-eyed engagement, where we understand that these are platforms that are not journalistic platforms. They don't particularly care about journalism, but they are a place where journalism is found and consumed, and you can introduce yourself to quality journalism.
Do you think they're media companies?
Everyone means something sort of different by that. What do you mean by that?
Do you think they're media companies? Should they have immunity that you do not have? You cannot get it wrong. They have an actual law that they get immunity for all that crap that's on their platform. Which is precisely why all that crap is on their platform. Yeah,
I mean, I look back at anyone who is working in a newspaper, has to recognize that it wasn't, it's only a matter of decades since, we had this ad monopoly, right? And, the reason we were able to pour money into quality journalism is because we had an ad monopoly, we had a distribution monopoly in the communities we covered. What's striking right now is there are two new companies with that ad monopoly, and they have it, more profoundly than ever before. But, where we would, personally vet every single ad and make sure it met our standards, and we had, 60-page standards books with all these different obscure rules about, like diet pills can't be advertised. Right. And we felt that was part of our obligation, part of the social responsibility that comes with that role in the community.
It's because you're adults that took a humanities course in college, and these are people that did not. So, but
you said that, not me. Yeah.
Yeah, I say it again. They shouldn't be running these companies. So, but what do you do with them? How do we
work with them?
Yeah.
I mean, look, we've actually got pretty good partnerships. Particularly Google, we've got a decent partnership where they come to us, we come to them, figure out how to work together on specific issues, and the relationships are good. I mean, you know this, it's not that these folks set out to destroy journalism, right? And if you're coming just in a clear-eyed way of what you want to accomplish, and clear-eyed that you need to have that your journalism needs to have its own center of gravity, and you can't bet the farm on these platforms, then I think you can work with them. But what else are we doing? We're also reporting the hell out of these stories.
Yes, nice Google piece today. Well done.
Yeah.
I have to say, you all should read
Thanks.
it. They're very naughty. Essentially, let me translate it for you. They're very naughty at Google, and it's bad. It's real bad over at Google. It's a fantastic story. But so then, how do you get big then? I want to finish up talking about this idea of how do you get big then? If you are you're pretty small. You're a pretty small organization, the New York Times. How do you think you think big enough? Because sometimes I feel like the media organizations, and I think I said it to one of your editors when I was talking about, is think small and then think smaller. How do you get bigger? How do you imagine with these things, these giant semis running down the highway, running all the owning the digital advertising pretty much, not going to be broken up at this point at least? How does the New York Times think big enough about its brand, and how do you get there?
I mean, I'll take any advice you have to offer. I mean, I think a few things. One, we stopped holding the future at arm's length, and under Dean and his team, it feels like we've finally understood that we are going to need to succeed as a digital news company, and that's going to look different. It's not going to change who we are. We are still an organization that's fundamentally built around original, on-the-ground, reported, expert, obsessively verified, independent journalism. That's the core. That doesn't change.
Right.
but what form that journalism takes, right now, more people are listening to The Daily every day, which is our news podcast, than ever opened up the front page in the New York Times. So, I think one answer to that is we're trying to embrace change as an organization.
What does that mean to you? I mean, people say I'm embracing change, and I have no idea what they're talking about.
Yeah.
So what does that mean from your perspective?
I mean, it means a lot of things. It means understanding that among other things, that print is our mature business, and it matters, and it's providing a ton of revenue that we need to support our big, ambitious journalism. But it's also something that's going to shrink every year, and we are going to need to replace it with a thriving digital business. And so, it's, embracing change means figuring out what the digital incarnation of cooking, our food section is. And it turns out it's an app of recipes. It means figuring out like what the daily news, what the daily front page experience, looks like in a digital environment. It turns out it's something like The Daily. It means experimenting, making the report much more visual. It means integrating, serious technical chops into our newsroom in a really profound way that allows us to do an investigation into Twitter, that can systematically expose, the widespread bot fraud that had been hiding under the surface.
Yeah, they're all over. Recently, Maggie Haberman was responding to a bot, and I had to text her and say, "Stop talking to the bots. You're talking to a bot." She didn't even realize it. You're right. That's a good investigation to do.
Yeah.
But go ahead, keep going.
And then I would just say, I actually lost my train of thought.
All right. What do you? AG, what is going to save the New York Times in the future? That's a pretty important question. That was the question. What else?
So what's going to say? I mean, well, you were asking about growth, and
right.
I think
get that. How do you?
I think we have a. So where do you get that? I think that the internet had this sort of myth of infiniteness, right? That tricked a lot of us, and that caused a lot of us to obsess over more. So there's more content, and the word content actually to me, well, it suggests this very specific thing, right? It's content is something that fills a content bucket, right? And journalism, right? Or if you're in a different industry like television or whatever, is like this requires an affirmative vision, right? We believe that that people are, in an on-demand environment, which the internet is,
right,
and now radio is, and now television is. In an on-demand environment, people will gravitate towards the best stuff.
Right.
And so our business strategy today is boiled down to make stuff that's worth paying for. And it's that simple. Make stuff that's worth paying for. And, the growth question's interesting. We're 6 or 7 years out from everyone making fun of us for believing that people will pay for journalism. And now I suspect most of the news organizations in this room either have a paywall or are looking at one. And I don't think we fully know what the growth potential is, because I think that the market hasn't fully developed.
Let me lay a premise out.
Yeah.
There's a paper in Washington that a billionaire bought for not much money, actually. It was kind of a bargain for him.
Yeah.
Jeff Bezos is $164 billion, right? Which is a lot of money. Would you ever see the need to have that kind of investment from one of these massive billionaires? What would happen if, say, the one I think should buy you is Lorraine Jobs, but I bugged her about it.
The New York Times is not for sale.
I get that, but what would you, I get that. Okay, but wait, let me just say, what would you do? It's not for sale, because you're thinking in a different term. What would you do with $1 billion? What would the New York Times do if they had $1 billion to deploy?
I get this question. I get this question occasionally, but hear me out. It's an interesting question in the abstract, but when you actually look at the reality on the ground, Jeff Bezos has been very clear that he wants the Washington Post to make a profit. So yes, the richest man,
Right.
not just on Earth, but I believe in the history of Earth, bought this newspaper.
Well, he's leaving Earth, but go ahead. Him and Elon are going off to Mars.
Bought this news.
Fight with their, they work out a lot. Anyway. They do. Go ahead. Sorry.
So
digress.
he bought this newspaper, and yes, he started investing in it again.
Right.
And all of us at the New York Times are delighted to see that, because quite frankly, we need more journalists in this country.
Right.
And it is not a zero-sum game. And we need a healthy Washington Post in this country. And so we are delighted to see it growing again. But the Washington Post is still a significantly smaller paper than the New York Times, and another paper owned by a billionaire, the Wall Street Journal, another very fine paper owned by a billionaire.
Mm-hmm. Not such a fine billionaire, but go ahead. Again, come on. Okay, Wall Street Journal people, I work there. Go ahead.
Is also smaller. So I mean, I do not think that for a second, I do not think for a second that the ownership structure of the New York Times is somehow hindering our ability to invest in great journalism. The last year, we've expanded our Washington bureau, we've expanded our tech coverage, we've expanded our business coverage.
But startups get massive events.
Yeah.
The other day, a dog walking firm got $1 billion. It was insane. Why would you not want that investment to do great local journalism? I could think of a million things I could do with $1 billion.
Yeah, point to me where someone has just thrown a ton of money at the journalism problem, just thrown a ton of money, and it's worked out well. I've seen some really great, honorable intentions from folks who I will not name here, but
talking about fusion, right?
I think.
Got it. That's fair.
But I think what we need to do is we need to build a business that sustains journalism. We cannot just be reliant on the altruism of people. We don't want a government-run news organization like we see in other. The thing that makes the New York Times special, the thing that I think distinguishes us, from almost any other news organization. Not any. But among a handful of news organizations, is its independence, and that is baked into every fiber of what this institution is. And I don't think it's separate from.
I do think the New York Times with $1 billion is different than other organizations, because you all will use it correctly.
Well, then we're just going to go, and we're going to have to go out.
Refuse to take the money I'm offering.
No, we're going to have to make that $1 billion ourselves.
And can you?
What's that? Can we grow that big? I'm really optimistic. We've got 3.5 million subscribers now, which is more than any newspaper at the peak of print. And I feel like we're still growing. I feel like we're still learning how to succeed in this digital space. And I feel like the market for paid journalism is still growing and maturing as well. So I'm optimistic. I really believe it when I say that. I don't think people are dumb. I think people want stuff worth paying for. Absolutely. I think they want the best journalism. And it's part of the reason why I always answer the opposition question the way I do. It's so easy to get drawn into cycles, but trust is a long game. And what we do, our mission: seek the truth, hold power to account, help people understand the world. That's perfect for this moment, but it's also perfect for every moment. And I believe that when the noise clears and the smoke clears, and we all look around, we're going to be hungry for news sources that you can trust.
Right. All right. Last question. What is the thing you've done that's just most boneheaded of all this year?
That I've done personally?
As you know, now you're the CEO, you got the job title, you got the suit going on.
Well, our CEO is actually here
today. The CEO, I'm sorry, the publisher.
I'm not making any moves, Mark, don't worry.
I'm sorry, Mark, I don't mean CEO, the publisher. I know all your boneheaded moves, but go ahead. What? I'm teasing, I love his Facebook stuff. What have you done? What do you think you've done well, and one thing you've done that you were like, I gotta.
I don't know. I've actually enjoyed this, but it felt pretty boneheaded not to ask who the moderator of this talk was going to be.
Okay. Well done. Well played, young man. All right. A real one.
A real one. I thought I got out of that.
No.
Oh gosh, I don't know. I mean, I'm.
What do you need to learn? Then I'll give it to you. I'll make it.
Like so much. I'm 38 years old, and I'm stepping into a big role at a critical moment. You know, I remember, you know, the announcement about my appointment had gone out, I think, 10 days before the election or something like that. And, you know, we had drawn up the front page, Madam President. And
then the meter was going off and on. Go ahead.
Yeah. And, you know what? Why don't we just blame the needle on me? Should we do that for the bonehead?
The needle, it was such a mind fuck, but go ahead.
Yeah. But I just remember, this moment, at the end of the night or the next morning of just saying like, oh wow, this is a real moment. I went into this job sort of thinking like, all we have to do, as a company, as a leadership team, me in this role is find a sustainable business model to save quality journalism. And now we also have to defend the underlying precept of a free press in a functioning democracy. So I feel like I have a ton to learn. I feel like I'm learning a lot every day. And I'm sure if you get a couple drinks in these guys, every one of them will have some boneheaded thing.
Yeah, they don't need drinks to do that. Journalism people just vomit up information all the time. Yeah. So you think, if you looked at the New York Times 10 years from now, you're 10 years in the job.
Yeah.
What does it look like?
I mean, I hope it feels exactly the same, right? I hope like that sort of sense of like what it stands for and what you expect when you interact. But I hope we've got a big TV show that people tune into once a week, which we're launching, at the beginning of next year, that people have learned is like dives into, something deeply in a sophisticated way that makes them pay attention to something that they didn't think they had to pay attention to, whether it's, genocide in Myanmar, or the, starvation of the systematic starvation of children in Yemen. I hope that I hope that we have realized that quality journalism is what we do, and that it can take a million forms. And I hope we've proven that it has a big global audience. And I hope that we have proven that to enough of a degree that we have lessons that we can push back into the industry, because I really do believe that journalism is an ecosystem that needs to rise collectively. I don't think there's one institution, no matter how much you grow, that's going to grow big enough to support the needs of our society.
Right. Well, on that note, A.G.
Great. Thanks. Thank you.
Well, that was truly a terrific interview. So thank you to Kara for showing the power of independent, fearless, well-informed journalism served up with a great lace of humor. And thank you to A.G. for surviving with your mother watching and for defending the cause of journalism so forcefully. You said that this is a troubling time for all of us who care about the free press. It's also, though, an exciting time to see people like A.G. come together with so many of us in the room to defend the power of the free press and work to uphold it. We are, at the end of the evening, or this part of the evening, we're about to go through and have a reception courtesy of City with plenty more booze and dessert. But before I do, 4 quick things. Sorry, yeah. Sorry, JP Morgan Chase, apologies. Sorry, JP Morgan Chase, I'd hate to give City credit for anything that you're paying for. So thank you, JP Morgan Chase, for our booze and dessert. But before I do, a couple of quick housekeeping points. Firstly, thank you to Ed Schuyler, Jessica Lessin, and Gary Liu for taking part this evening. Please do look out for the silver bowls on the table. There'll be volunteers circulating to try and get your pledge cards. Don't forget to put the next year's date for the dinner in your diaries, which is the October the 16th, 2019. As you go out, there are also tote bags from from the South China Morning Post. There are copies of Elad Gil's book, The High Growth Handbook. Thank you, Stripe, for that. And there's also the most recent issue of Columbia Journalism Review. And last but not least, I just wanted to say that I mentioned earlier that it's good to be a geek. I think right now it's a great time to be a journalistic geek, diving in to the economy, finance, and business. But geeks can only do that if they're trained to be geeky at places like the Knight-Bagehot Fellowship. So to all of you who are fellow geeks, as journalists who are obsessively interested in trying to illuminate how the world of money and business and finance works, keep going. Your work, my work, our work is more important today than ever. And to all of you who are supporting us, thank you, and go drink up. Thank you all.